Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to Vayeret HaShachar English lecture series. Every year we get into this time period. It's 3 weeks, the 9 days, it's Tisha B'Av. And generally every year it's a little bit hard to tune into the time. It's the 21st century. We're all comfortable. Most of us in this room are living in Israel. The world at large seems to be quite a safe and secure place. This year things have definitely been very different. It's not as hard to tune into the time to get a taste exactly what destruction, what Churban means. But when we're dealing with destruction, when we're dealing with Churban, it's not only the modern destruction and the difficulties that we're facing as a people, but it's also looking in the past, the difficulties that the Jewish people faced, that they face now, but hopefully they won't face in the future. It's a great honor for us to have tonight Rabbi Teller. Rabbi Teller has his eyes on the past, specifically the Holocaust, but other historical Jewish events in history. He's very much involved in the present, but Rabbi Teller's eyes are very much focused on the future and how we can make that difference in Bezrat Hashem welcoming Moshiach. Without further ado, to call on Rabbi Teller.
Thank you very much, Marcos, for your very kind words. I'm happy to be here again. I remember how much I enjoyed it last year. I wish I remembered what I said, but I enjoyed being here. So let's get to the point. Since Simchat Torah, our challenge has been to be united. Alas, Achdut is a term which gets a lot of talk, but not as much walk. There was a Rebbe who turned to his a chassid turned to his Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I'd like you to daven, I want you to pray that my wife should die. What? Yeah, I want you to, what are you talking about? I said, listen here, I'm a very poor man. If I have to give her a divorce, it'll cost me a fortune. But if she dies, it doesn't cost me a penny. The Rebbe said, I have a better idea. Chazal, the rabbis teach that if you pledge money to charity and you don't deliver, within a year, your spouse will die. I said, Rebbe, that's brilliant. It was right before Rosh Hashanah. They gave him after. He pledged 500 rubles to tzedakah. The Gabayim came on Sunday and said, I'm not giving. That happened Rosh Hashanah time. Half a year later, it's already Purim. He said, Rebbe, it's already Purim, and she hasn't even sneezed yet. I said, oi, I forgot to tell you, it only works if you don't want it to work. Now what am I supposed to do? I suggest you go out and buy her a real fancy gift. Maybe this will help. He's desperate. He buys her a very fancy schmancy gift. She can't believe it. He hasn't bought her anything from the year they're married. She makes him a gourmet meal, which he loves. He buys her another gift, and another gourmet meal, and another gift, another gourmet meal. Comes that little time, they're already lovebirds. Says, "Hey, Rebbe, I don't want her to die. There's a way out. What's that? You have to give the charity." Oh, no. Oh, yes. Not to talk about it, but to concretize, to do something. So Achdut is something we talk about so much, the unity, so much so it actually motivated me. We produced a film on this. The one thing I can assure you we accomplished is I'm in debt for a lifetime. But to a certain extent, it did make an impact on people. Now, what I wanted to describe to you, and it's a horrible description, but if you can think back, imagine you're overseas. And on Simchat Torah, or I should say better, on Shmini Atzeret, this past year, you see someone looking horrible. They look awful. You say, what happened? He said, didn't you hear? And the way they looked, the only thing that could have occurred to you is that there was a civil war in Israel. Because you think to yourself, if they could invade people who are praying on Yom Kippur and beat them up, then maybe, because it never would have occurred to us that Hamas would breach Israeli security. It must be that they now invaded a synagogue in Simchat Torah. Achdut means, unity means, we don't have to think alike, but we have to be like family, sitting at the same table, under one roof. peacefully. When the war broke out in Simchat Torah, many of my students evacuated overseas, and I thought to myself, there is no place that I would rather be than in Israel with my brethren in the trenches. Overnight, Israel was embraced by the spirit of Achdut and unity. I have a podcast called Teller from Jerusalem, and I devoted 2 podcasts just to the heartwarming stories of what was going on. And my first encounter was, not even a week after the war broke out, I had to fetch a document from Hadassah Hospital, Hadassah in Karim. I could warn you, in case you don't know this, don't ever think you're going to park there. So I listened to my own advice, and after 40 hakafot, I realized this is not happening. But I knew that there is a kibbutz 4 kilometers away, and I'm a runner, so I figured I'll park the car at the kibbutz, and then I'll get my morning run running to Hadassah. And sure enough, I parked my car at the kibbutz, and I'm just starting to run towards Hadassah, and a kibbutznikit, a woman from the kibbutz, obviously a very poor kibbutznikit, she couldn't afford much clothing, she stopped and she gave me a lift. By the time she let me off, we were fast friends. She wished me well, I wished her well. Under normal circumstances, I don't know how much of dialogue we would have had. But we were just best friends, as poor as she was. Achdut also means that there's strength, and just like there's strength in numbers, there's also strength in a common cause. I think that's the reason behind Tfilah b'tzibur. When you pray with a minyan, your prayer is more powerful and efficacious. When you pray by yourself, you're naked and exposed. But together, as a minyan, Beryl is about tzedakah, and Chatzkel is a mezakis Rabbi, and Yankel is a very diligent person. Everyone's assets are fused and amalgamated together. There was a course in university in England, and the proctor, that's an American word. In England, invigilation. Anyways, there was a proctor who was administering the test, over 150 students. And he told the students, listen carefully. You have 1 hour and 50 minutes for this exam, and not 1 minute longer. You go 1 second over 1 hour and 50 minutes, and you failed. I'm sorry, because it's just a risk that I'm going to toss. You know, it's an amazing thing. We talk about also chesed. The root of chesed is from the word chus. I put it down there. Will it pick up? I've had too many times. Anyways, chesed comes from the word chus. Chus means something you feel a close connection to. I tried to explain this to my students. I said, when I speak, it's like a press conference. I said, if I would take one of these tape recorders and throw it at the back of the room, everyone in the room would shriek, but one person would shriek louder than the others. When you have a connection to something, it's, anyway, so I'm sorry. Okay, so back to the test. He said, you have 1 hour and 50 minutes for this exam, and not 1 second longer. You go 1 minute over, 1 hour and 50 minutes, and you failed. 1 hour and 50 minutes later, there's a neat tall pile of exams on the teacher's desk. One student was still copiously filling out his exam. When 2 hours had lapsed, he attempted to hand in his paper. The proctor said, you failed. He said, do you know my name? He said, I don't know, and I don't care. He said, you don't know who I am? I don't know, and I don't care. He said, you sure you don't know my name? I don't know, and I don't. He took off his eyeglasses, staring at me. I said, you sure you don't know who I am? He said, I don't know, and I don't care. Student said, great. Took the test, shoved it in the middle of the pile, and ran away. That's the power of a tzibur. What we can't accomplish by ourselves, we can't accomplish when we're united together. And the amazing thing is that we know, even in not desperate times like this, there is a very innate sense of kinship among Jews. You meet a fellow Jew, you travel far away, you go on a family vacation, my favorite oxymoron. You go to Middle Yehupitz and you meet a fellow Jew, it is irresistible. I travel a lot. Everyone comes over, bageling. So I was in Omaha, Nebraska, which Jewishly is pretty far away. And I stepped into a supermarket, and this girl calls out, Ima, to the woman standing right next to her, not Satovaci, Sato Forte, Ima, what time is candle lighting? A critical question for a Tuesday afternoon. Because we can't resist. And I always wanted to know, is it just us? Or maybe it's every other minority? And I have the answer. I was flying from Calgary to Edmonton. In that part of Western Canada, there are no blacks for tens of thousands of miles. And in the waiting room, it was a connecting flight, there was a black gentleman who must have felt very awkward being the only one for tens of thousands of miles. And I boarded a plane, a connecting flight, and there was another black gentleman. And I had to see what's going to happen when the only two blacks for tens of thousands of miles see each other. My eyes are trained and focused. He comes closer and closer and closer. No, hey bro, give me skin, just right past. You see a fellow Jew, it's irresistible. Shalom Aleichem, give me some money. You don't just keep on going. And why is that? Says Rav Meir Simcha, because we were all together at Sinai, and inside we understand that our souls are linked. In 1913, one Jew was on trial, and inevitably, the whole Jewish people were on trial. What am I referring to? Good. I mean, don't get swell-headed, but that's correct. Mendel Beilis was on trial, accused, it was a blood libel, accused of totally innocent man. He happened to have been a very fine person. And for his defense, I mean, he sat 2 years in jail, in a cinder block. For his defense, there were great Russian jurists and lawyers and the Chazon Ish and Rav Meir Shapiro all worked together for his defense. At one point, the prosecutor read a page from Talmud Yevamos, Atam kriyim adam vein akum kriyim adam. You say that you were called man, meaning all Jews are one man, and non-Jews are not referred. Akum kriyim adam, but a non-Jew doesn't even get the title of a man. And Rav Meir Shapiro explained that if a Jew is stabbed in London, a Jew in Paris feels the pain. Whereas, he didn't give this example, but if an Episcopalian is knifed in St. Louis, then an Episcopalian in New Orleans doesn't feel the pain. We're Adam. We're both like one man. And that's the reason why Israel witnessed and experienced so many solidarity missions composed of businessmen and surgeons and professors, stockbrokers, chemists, so many professions, so many countries, dropping everything, high-paying jobs to pick potatoes and get their hands dirty. Abandoning high-paying jobs to cook for soldiers. Uriel Eldad is a fellow I do not know, but I heard the following story. He has a kind of seminary, I guess, I don't know what to call it, a course he offers to Israelis before they draft. And he gives them a concise history of Zionism, and he brought them to Har Herzl, the military cemetery. And Har Herzl is divided according to military campaigns. The War of Independence, the War of Attrition, Six-Day War. And there at the War of Independence, there are soldiers or gravestones for Almoni, for Anonymous. Anonymous died trying to liberate the road to Jerusalem. And these 18-year-olds could not understand, how could it be that we don't know their name? And he explained to them, these were Holocaust survivors who came right off the boat. There's an acute manpower shortage. They gave them a gun. And even if their fellow comrades knew their names, they too were killed. But these 18-year-olds couldn't get their head around the fact no one knows their name. No one comes to visit them. And they called him up 2 weeks later and said, Uriel, matzanu et mishpacha. We found the family. What do you mean? It's 65 years. You didn't find. We found matzanu et mishpacha. You didn't find. Matzanu, what are you talking about? I said, Anachnu mishpacha. We're the family. And these boys go up every year on the yard site to visit their family. So we can be agreeable, but we don't have to agree. We can be divided and not divisive. Chilukei deyot, but not chilukei levavot. And pardon me, I can't really tell, but this is a very American example. It just occurred to me last night. RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, an extraordinarily liberal judge, liberal. She's left of left. She's almost coming around the other way around. She's so left. And on the same Supreme Court sat Anton Scalia, totally conservative. They did not agree about a single thing, and they were best friends. They were always talking to each other. They never agreed about a thing, but they sat together. Or, I'm 27 years old, but I'm learning at least 50 years. And I never once saw Beis Hillel agree with Beis Shammai. Not once. Beis Hillel says one thing, Shammai disagrees. Shammai says one thing, Beis Hillel disagrees. And yet they married each other, they got along together. So what's the connection with all this unity and the 3 weeks? Duh. We lost the Bayit, we lost the temple because of Sinat Chinam, of baseless hatred. Now, you're aware of the fact, well, first of all, if you don't have Achdut, if you don't have unity, you're going to have baseless hatred. But the fact of the matter is, Bayit Rishon was destroyed because of 3 cardinal sins: murder, if we can translate murder, idolatry, sexual crimes. Speakers don't speak about this for the simple reason, I think if anyone would commit any of these terrible sins, it wouldn't take a rocket scientist to realize that they've done something fundamentally, seriously wrong. And they must do tshuva. Whereas, if we have baseless hatred, we don't have the overwhelming sense we've done something wrong. Because everybody thinks my hatred is legit. This is kosher. Their hatred, that's baseless. Borough Park is a religious neighborhood in Brooklyn. It's primarily, almost exclusively Hasidic. And the largest Hasidus in Borough Park is Bobov. And I had a friend, he passed away during COVID, Yussel Chapnik. He was having his apartment painted by a black painter. And they were taking all the paintings and photographs off the wall. And one of the enlargements was of the Bobov Rebbe. And the black painter said to my friend Yussel, he said, "Is this your rabbi?" He said, "No." "Well, why isn't he your rabbi?" "He's not my rabbi. Let's get on with the job." He said, "But why isn't he here?" "He's not my rabbi. Let's get on with the job." You're making a mistake. He must be he's not my rabbi. Look at the wall. There's so many rabbis, beards, payas. This one's not my rabbi. And then the black painter said, "He's my rabbi." He said, "What?" He pulled out his wallet and ripped out a photograph of the Bobov Rebbe. He said, "What the?" He said, "I'll tell you." He said, one morning I was painting his house. The Rebbe came home and he said to me, "Did you have breakfast?" I said, "No." He said, "Sit down." He waited upon me, served me breakfast, and then he said to me, "I want to tell you something." I knew just what he was going to say. And I heard the shmooze a million times. He's going to tell me, "I'm paying you good money. I want a perfect job." And the Rebbe said, we once had the world of perfection. But because of our sins, the temple was destroyed. And ever since, we've never had perfection. So I cannot ask you to do a perfect job. I'd like you to try your hardest. And you know how it is? People recommend. He gave me hundreds of his chassidim. No one ever offered me breakfast, but they all say to me, "I'm paying you good money. I want the perfect job." And I said to him, "You want a perfect job? There's no temple. How do you want a perfect job?" We're distanced from a perspective that we're missing something very, very important without the Beit HaMikdash, without the temple. I don't know if they're still around, but when I was a kid, we established, I'm 27, they had these magazines, "What's wrong with this picture?" Always, ice skating on the cement. What's wrong with this picture? So my kids, I travel a lot. I was in America, and my kids got together. They decided they wanted to buy for my oldest daughter a stroller which doesn't require a Herculean weightlifter to lift. And I was given the task of bringing it back. But of course, they told me the day I was leaving, everything was packed. People sent so many things with me. I'm not proud of this, but I decided I had no room. I was going to do the shtick of taking a stroller and checking it in like people who really have a baby check in a stroller. And that's what I did. Land in Tel Aviv, pick up the stroller, waiting to go through passport control. Now, you've all traveled. You all know that sense of horror. I forgot something, What did I forget? You check your pockets a million times. So I'm standing waiting to go through password control, and I have the computer on my shoulder, and I have the carry-on, and I have the stroller. The man says to me, there's something missing from this picture. What did I? And I'm checking, and I said, no. He said, yes. I said, what's missing? He said, there's a stroller, but no baby. So there is something really missing. We have a lot going for us. We need a lot of help for. But the picture is not perfect without the Beit HaMikdash. So the Baba Rabbi, who I alluded to earlier, wrote an elegy in Kina for Tisha B'Av about the Holocaust. And here's one remarkable line. Kol Yisrael al tishkachu b'chol hadorot. All of Klal Yisrael, the entire Jewish people, you may not forget for the end of eternity. Meaning that remembering is not just a privilege or an option for a select few, but obligatory upon us all. Al tishkachu, don't forget. Who could forget? But then we forgot already how united we were just 10 months ago. And the last request of those who perished was Zosta Gedenken. Remember. 2 weeks ago, I was privileged to attend the 90th birthday party of Rabbi Beryl Wine. If you feel bad that you weren't there, I should add it was a 5-hour affair. Actually, everybody enjoyed themselves, I think, except for Rabbi Wine. And for me, the best line was, in the middle of this marathon filibuster, he said the following. People think that anti-Semitism is a term that was made up to describe what's going on in our time. That was what he said 2 weeks ago. I'm going to quote you what he wrote 29 years ago. The Holocaust, which is only 50 years old, is in much greater danger of being forgotten than Tisha B'Av, which commemorates events of 2,000 years ago. That is because Tisha B'Av has a category in Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, dedicated to it, while the Holocaust does not. With time, the greatest and most significant of miracles and events can fade away. The only way to preserve them is through symbolism. And so I propose to you and I submit to you, what is the appropriate way to commemorate what we lost in the Holocaust? 1.5 million children under the age of 12 perished at the hands of the Nazis. How do we best commemorate? I'm a senior docent in Yad Vashem. I ask this question on a weekly basis. And the usual answer I get is school grounds and playgrounds and schoolyards, which is fine with me. But we're duty-bound to just commemorate not just the holy people that perished and pay homage to their memories. And I don't just mean to the vast communities and shuls and numbers, but not to deface their memory. Well, first let me talk about how do we commemorate. The problem is museums can become mausoleums. In literature can become ephemeral gibberish. And statues can become shards of pottery. So we're going to have a hit upon something more significant. Paying homage to them means not defacing their memory, not the question, why didn't they fight back, shows you are ignorant about the Holocaust. If you were in a labor battalion of 10 and one escaped, what happened to the other 9? Not the right word. They were not killed, they were murdered. It's a very important distinction. If you're driving your car, Khalil, and you run someone over, you've killed them. The Nazis never killed. It was always premeditated. The 10 Commandments forbids not to murder. If you're in a ghetto and one Jew escapes to join the partisans, easily 1,000 can be lined up and mowed down. Rebbetzin Meyer, I had the privilege of learning in a very important yeshiva in America. And my menayel, the principal of the yeshiva, his mother was an extraordinarily holy woman. I wrote 2 stories about her. And she was in a labor camp in Austria, highly expecting, and she prayed every day that it shouldn't be a boy, for if it would be a boy, she'd have the problem of arranging a brit, the circumcision. Now, I can assure you, most people in camps were not worried about this, but this and only this was on her mind. And the woman had such incredible faith. She took the slop that was fed to her, buried it into the ground. So in fact, to be a boy, perhaps she can manufacture, cook, produce something out of it and serve it at the Sudat Mitzvah on the meal on the 8th day. God played a little trick and a baby boy was born. The miracle of miracles. On the 8th day, a transport arrived in the camp, and on the transport was the male, the circumciser from her village in Hungary. She was ecstatically happy, said, must be brought your male messer, must be brought your knife for Mila. But he had not. She said, no, she said, it must be you made a mistake. But how could you make a mistake with those few meager possessions you're allowed to bring with you? Such an important Rebbe in her honor. He looked, and sure enough, he had made an error, and he brought the knife for circumcision. Performed the bris, and she held up her little baby, said, Menashe, don't cry. Famished baby, I denied you a proper bris, but with God's help, I'll yet provide a proper bar mitzvah. And 13 years later in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Hasidic Williamsburg in Brooklyn, at the bar mitzvah, there's more drinks and schnapps that fill lakes and oceans and rivers, and schmaltzer and gefilte fish that can fill vats and tubs, and kishke and kugel that can fill auditoriums and plazas, and everyone's eating and drinking and merry. Menashe gets up, delivers bar mitzvah drushes, shtetl, his sermon, and just then this elderly gentleman walks in from the back of the room, malodorous, odorific, verstunken, redolent, wrinkled, crinkled, disheveled clothing, but eyes that are chipped from agate. He walks right up to the front of the room, and good old Williamsburg style begins to clink. Menashe, everyone's trying to quiet down this intruder. Menashe, one gentleman, a little more enterprise than the other, passed him a bottle of schnapps, but he couldn't be dissuaded. Rabbi said, ladies and gentlemen, you think you're here to attend a bar mitzvah, but you're mistaken. In fact, you're here to attend a bris. At this point, the hook was out and he got them by the neck. And he related a story. 13 years ago, we were deep in hell, denied and deprived, beaten and tortured every day. It was your mother who reminded us who we are, and indeed who we should be. You think what you're eating now is tasty? I want you to know that little something your mother served at your Seudas mitzvah was more geschmack and heavenly than paradise itself. If she can maintain that there, how much more so can we maintain this where we are? Life is hard, but that's the way that it's configured. So we wrote this story, older than me, about 29 years ago. And 12 years ago, my son was wed in Williamsburg. If you're from New York, you know that Williamsburg has become the wedding capital of New York. And I'm just about to walk my son down to the chuppah. In a Hasidic yid that I never saw before in my life, and I've never seen since, with all the trappings, langa rekel, bulletproof stockings, a hat large enough to be a shaila of ohel on Shabbos, salt and pepper, salt. He came over and he said to me 3 words in Yiddish. Had I not held on to the rail for sure, I would have fainted. And he said to me, he knew who I was. I had no idea who he was. Ich bin Menashe. He's the baby I wrote about. And then he walked out of my life. It's unbelievable what this woman did. That's resistance. She made a family in the bowels of the Holocaust of righteous, pious saints. So, how to recall? We don't wish the story of those who perished to be a dead story. Those who remember the Aztecs, the Incas, that's not what we want. We don't want a plaque on the wall, here were the Aztecs. We want to carry on their way. The Gemara says that when Chizkiyahu HaMelech died, King Chizkiyahu, probably, I don't know. That's what I was thinking. Hezekiah, thank you. When he died, and then no one was more responsible for Torah learning Midan Vadbarsha from the north all the way to the south. So what did they do? Not museums and not literature, not statues. Hoshiva Yeshiva al Kivra. They established yeshiva on his burial place. That's a fitting tribute. No one asked my opinion about anything, but I believe this is the reason why Chabad made a yeshiva on the Rebbe's kever. Hoshiva Yeshiva al Kivra. That's a fitting way. More children learning Torah, performing mitzvot. That's a fitting tribute. I don't want to sound too sharp, but the verse says, Lo hametim yahaluluka. We sing this in Hallel. The dead, they cannot praise you. I don't want to sound too sharp, but without life, death has no future. We carry on the memory by carrying on in their ways. The story of the Baal Shem Tov, it's said about the Baal Shem that he was able to go to a particular forest, recite a specific formula, and an angel appeared. 1 generation later, they knew where the forest was, and they knew where the specific spot was, but they didn't know the formula. 1 generation later, they knew where the forest was, they didn't know the specific spot, nor did they know the formula. And we, so many generations later, we don't know where the forest is. Certainly not the formula, and not that spot. So what do we have? The grandeur and the greatness of the Baal Shem? We have everything. For we had the story. And that brings us back. Through a story, you can stress the individual. On Shavuos B'Tammuz, on the 17th of Tammuz, was the tug from the Rabbanon, the day of the rabbis in Vilna. I wrote about this in my book. They gathered every single rabbi in Vilna, and they assassinated them. One rabbi was Rav Shvilzev Gustman, perhaps the name is familiar to you. He was placed in a room, and the SS told him not to move. When they walked out, he ran outside. He hid in a potato patch. And the Germans came looking for him. They had dogs that were licking his face. Soldiers were standing on his arms and on his elbows. And the whole time he was reciting Vidui, and a woman from the apartment above saw everything that was happening. When the Germans finally left, she sent down a pair of scissors and a Lithuanian peasant cap. He cut off his beard, put on the cap, and he hid with the peasants, with the partisans, pardon me. If you know the song, went round and round in circles, they say that's about Rav Gustman. And he rebuilt. It's an amazing thing. Rav Gustman came to Israel. He went to America, and then he came to Israel in 1967. The very same year that he came to Israel, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein came in Aliyah. Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein was the Rosh Yeshiva of Gush Etzion, the son-in-law of Rabbi Soloveitchik. And then when Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran, which precipitated the beginning of the Six-Day War, everyone was called up to the army, and there was a total shortage of manpower. Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein was not in the army. He had just come in Aliyah, so he became a milkman. And on his beat was Rav Gustman. The way the story was told to me, he delivered his little adorable little milk bottles. So Rav Lichtenstein delivered milk to Rav Gustman. Now again, I'm 27, but I remember I was a little boy. And the pictures they showed in the newspaper of the gleaming armor of the Arab armies, and their soldiers and their uniforms were crisp and neat and folded. And Israeli soldiers, they looked like threadbare, ragtag. The guns were over their shoulders with cords, not even with belts. And Rav Gustman's students in Crown Heights said, Rebbe, you have to come back. Rebbe, it's too dangerous. You have to come back. I said, you kidding me? I should leave Israel? My milkman. There's a Bucky in Shas. He knows everything. Anyways, Rav Gustman, every Wednesday morning he gave a shiur, which was the fulcrum of religious Jerusalem. If you were an accountant or a dentist or a lawyer, and you knew how to learn, you went to that shiur. It was 3.5 hours. He told stories. He explained the underpinnings of learning. And a person who was connected to the shiur was Professor Robert Aumann, an American religious economist who in 2005 became a Nobel laureate in economics. Professor Aumann's son Shlomo was killed in the First Lebanon War. And at the funeral, Rav Gustman said to his driver, I want to go be Menachem Ovel right now to the Aumanns. Now, that's very unusual to go straight from the cemetery unless you're a very close relative or a close friend, but you don't argue with Rav Gustman. And he said, Professor Aumann, I too had a son. His name was Meir. He was taken from Vilna to the Poner Forest and he was shot. He wasn't wearing an Israeli uniform. He was naked. And I never had a chance to sit shiva for my Meir. Can we sit shiva together for a few minutes? And he said, Rebbe Nichamtani, you've consoled me. We're skipping a little bit, not that you would know. It's fresh to me, I never gave this talk before. Of course, Auschwitz is the largest cemetery on earth. There was no distinction in Auschwitz between religious, not religious, enlightened, not enlightened, poor and wealthy. But now we have to learn the secret of how to live together. Dr. Pearl, every year on Tisha B'Av, I think the hardest mitzvah in Shulchan Aruch is you're not allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. And I'm so stringent, I already start a few days beforehand. and I taper it down a little bit, and then I slowly build up. I don't want to, God forbid I should, do this sin. So I read every year on Tisha B'Av Dr. Pearl's book, I Was a Doctor in Auschwitz, Dr. Gazella, Dr. Gizzy Pearl. It's an amazing book. And she's able to put in her history cynicism also. Dr. Pearl was an obstetrician in Hungary, and the Germans faced a problem. The war basically was over. By the Eastern Front, Germany was flat on its back, but not the war against the Jews. And now it's 1944, there's no more Luftwaffe, there's not enough oil for the tanks, but there's 825,000 Jews still alive in Hungary. What to do? So Eichmann moves into Hungary, not even with jeeps or half-tracks, with civilian cars. That's going to be the most expeditious destruction of Jewry in the Holocaust. The summer of 1944, 325,000 Hungarian Jews are incinerated. And Dr. Pearl is sent to Auschwitz, and her family is sent to the left in death. She's sent to the right in life. She doesn't want to be, to the right in life, of course, means also death, just not immediate. She doesn't want to be separated from her family. She runs to the left. Mengele will not give her the privilege of dying. He sends her back to the right. She runs again to the left, sends her back to the right. She runs again to the left, sends her back to the right. And then he learns that she's a doctor. In a grisly Nazi joke, he orders her to open up a hospital in Auschwitz. Auschwitz is a city of death. There's over 40 camps, and she's in Camp C, which is for Hungarian women. It's 1 kilometer by nearly half a kilometer, a city of death. One day the Nazis say they want all women that are pregnant in Camp C to take one step forward, and they'll be sent to a different camp with less arduous work and better rations. And even Dr. Pearl thinks nothing can be worse than where they are. The German genius is always making the worst worse, feeding upon our naivete, right? The Nile is not just a river in Egypt. And the reason the Germans wanted volunteers was because they could not tell. I don't know enough anatomy to explain this to you, but apparently when you are so starving, the veins no longer, they're porous and the liquid come out and the stomach becomes bloated. They couldn't tell who's pregnant and who's bloated because they're about to die. And Dr. Pearl can't imagine anything worse than what they're suffering. He encourages these women to go to their promised better camps. One day, doing her duties in camp, she saw what happened to the woman who had the crime of having a Jewish child in their belly. They were kicked in the stomach till the child came out and thrown into flames, alive, mother and child. And Dr. Pearl pledged from that moment on, there'd be no pregnant women, at least where she was in Camp C. That night, in the filth latrines with her own bare hands, she aborted any woman that was pregnant, including one simple seamstress from her village in Hungary who went, lo aleinu, 9 years without conceiving. Dr. Pearl was the agent which enabled this woman to become pregnant, and she was now in her final trimester, and Dr. Pearl aborted her. After the war, Dr. Pearl became a very famous obstetrician, Mount Sinai Hospital, and a world authority, a Welt authority on infertility. In 1947, she's called into the operating theater to perform an emergency C-section. She runs inside, and there's a woman with a tichel pulled tightly over her head. She says, "Gizzy, it's me." That's the woman she aborted in Auschwitz. And Dr. Pearl said, "Rabbanu Shalom, Master of the universe, enable me to deliver a healthy child. Let this be my revenge against Mengele." And in fact, she delivered a healthy child. From that point on, she began to count. She delivered another 3,000 children, which is why the pediatric pavilion Shaarei Tzedek is named after Dr. Pearl. In other words, she's able to commemorate the martyrs by bringing in so many new Jewish babies into this world. In Yad Vashem, we're really finishing. In Yad Vashem, there's a children's memorial, which thanks to the genius, it's as black can be. You see a reflection of candles and mirrors to look like a million reflections to commemorate the 1.5 million children. And you hear a tape in English, Yiddish, and Hebrew of children who perished. This is not my insight, this is Rabbi Beryl Wine. If you're of Ashkenazic ancestry, the only name you don't hear is your own. And no one ever thinks that for any reason that those that perished were less righteous than those that survived. And if we survived, and it's something I think about all the time. Moshe Rabbeinu had many beautiful names. Avigdor, Tuvia, Yedidya. And yet he's always referred to as Moshe Kimin Amayim Mishisuhu. He was drawn forth from the water. He always had that visage before his eyes. He could have been alligator fodder at the bottom of the river, but he was saved. Saved, therefore, to do something significant on behalf of his people and the world. We're survivors. To do something significant. Okay, and lastly, and we're pardoning the repetition from last year, but I was already asked to tell the story again. I wanted to write a story. I wanted to write about the Holocaust. As many of you know, the Holocaust is the most documented crime in history. There's nothing that has not been written about 1,000 times and in many languages. But there's one thing that was not written about. When the war was over, everyone was anxious to tell their story and how they've been betrayed and how they managed to survive. But the people who couldn't talk were the children. They didn't talk then, and they've never told their story. And I decided I wanted to collect their stories. So I traveled the world before it was too late and gathered the stories. And you know, if you have grandparents or great-grandparents that survived the Holocaust, they did everything possible to try and forget what happened. And then in the 1980s, it became chic to relate stories of the Holocaust. But by that point, the memory had done tricks. And people told me fantastic stories, but I knew that they couldn't be accurate. But we managed to isolate 9 stories which reflect the Holocaust kingdom, men and women, boys and girls, religious, not religious. And we worked on this book for 18 years, finally made a very draconian deadline to finally complete it. We met the deadline, but we made one little mistake. We're about to go to press, and I forgot, it sounds so silly, I forgot to make a cover for the book. Now, a cover is a very important component to a book. I always say whoever says they don't judge a book by its cover, I know they never tried to sell a book. So we needed a cover, so I put my team on it. That means my kids. They're going through archives, and they came across this picture. I don't know if you can see from the distance. It's a very dramatic picture that was shot in the day that Auschwitz was liberated. It's actually hundreds of children. We zoomed in on just a few of them. And to use a picture for a cover of a book, you need permission from the copyright holder. In this instance, the copyright holder of the picture is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. So I made the request. You have to fill out an affidavit, and you have to commit you're not going to make any changes. And I wrote, I'm going to make this change and this change and that change and this change and this change and that change and this change. And the next day, I had the picture, but in low resolution. They told me I'll get it in high resolution in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? I don't think I had 3 days. And you'll pardon me for being an Israeli, but my mind thinks about protexia. It's got to get the right protexia, the right vitamin P, the right connection. And I have a friend who lives in Baltimore, who's a very powerful Jew. They say that in his cell phone, he has the private number of every senator and congressman. Baltimore and Washington is like Modi'in and Kiryat Sefer, down the block. So I figured, I'm sure he's got to have the right connection. And his son was learning in yeshiva right next to my house. So I run to the yeshiva and I say, Aryeh, thinking this is a rhetorical question, Aryeh, is your father connected to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington? And he said, no. Shrek and a half. Disenchanted, crestfallen, melancholy, I'm walking out of the room, just crossing the threshold, and he says to me, but my mother is on the board. I was going to wring his neck. His mother's a judge, Chaya Friedman. I send her off an email. I said, Chaya, I desperately need your help. I gave her the call number, the lot number, the identifying number of the picture. The next day I had it high res. Then I thought to myself, the way I'm a senior docent in Yad Vashem, the way I conduct my tours, it's an amazing thing. Anytime you go to Yad Vashem, there are dozens of tours going on. The museum was created to be guided. And they're unspooling so much data that the head cannot absorb. We're talking about 15 countries over the span of 6 years, different regimes. It's too much information. So what I do is I tell stories, and from the story I pull out the information. Simple example would be, what's the most famous story of the Holocaust? Not a hard question. Anne Frank, correct. Anne Frank. But Anne's story is not a reflective story. She wasn't in the ghettos, wasn't in the camps, had a roof over her head, she was with her family, but it's a story. So my idea is always highlighting the individual. I wanted to colorize one. This picture is sepia. I wanted to highlight and colorize one child. But this I realized would require permission. So again, I fire off an email. I say, Chaya, get me permission to colorize one child. She writes me back. I'm in the middle of convening a murder trial. I have no time. I said, Chaya, this is killing me. I need your help. And I prevailed upon her. And she writes me back, yay, yay, nay, nay. I made the request. I cannot assure you they're going to agree. I'm thinking, come on. This is the Holocaust. It's apple pie. It's mom. They're not going to have a problem. That night, I had, excuse me, I'll use the technical term. I had a press queue in the largest press in Israel, arguably the largest press in the Middle East. At 10 o'clock at night, we had already burned the plates. They were on the drums. At 10 o'clock, we're going to have 10,000 covers. 3 hours before press queue, or to be accurate, 2 hours and 48 minutes, I get an email from the head archivist, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. Dear Rabbi Teller, we regret to inform you, you may not use the picture. If you wish to use the picture in its pristine state, without any zooming, colorization, alternative focus, you may. But once you make the slightest change and it's not in its pristine state, you may not. And particularly, colorizing this child, he spoke out recently, he's very sensitive, and our legal department said unequivocally, you may not colorize and change this picture. Shrek and a half. But I'm not such a pushover, a little bit of a fighter. I write her back right away. I said, please, tell me his name. Where does he live? Give me his phone number. I wish to speak with him. She writes me 1 hour and 49 minutes before press queue. We don't know his name. We don't even know where he lives. I said, but, you just told me he sensitive, he spoke out. 46 minutes before press queue, she sends me an online clipping from the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And it points to the people in this picture, of course now in the grips of old age, pointing to themselves as youngsters. It was apparent, I'll use the yeshivish term, it was mashma from the article that this boy's name is Hirsch. Now, I don't know if that's his first name or his last name. And if he's Hirsch, Hirsch lives in Europe. So I now have 38 minutes to find Hirsch in Europe. So Sherlock Teller is thinking, I discount England and Eurasia, I'm down to about 29 countries in 31 minutes to go. And then if you look at the picture, the kid looks pretty good. So I knew he couldn't be a Pole. A Pole couldn't look this good. He'd have to be Hungarian. Hungary was invaded March 1944. To look like this, he'd have to be Hungarian. So again, Sherlock Teller is thinking, where would Hungarian survivor of Auschwitz live in Europe today? And I concluded it would have to be either Belgium or Switzerland. We're down to 14 minutes. And then I remembered, I have a close friend, Moshe Loser Rappaport, who lives in Zurich, and he works for IBM. What a shidduch. So I called Moshe Loser. I said, Moshe Loser, I need you to find me Hirsch in Switzerland. He said, would that be his first name or his last name? He said, I don't know. I said, Hanoch. He said, so he asked me, is he from? Is he a religious man? He said, I don't know. He said, Hanoch, what are you drinking? I'm not drinking anything. I got 9 minutes. I got to find this. You know what? I'm sure he's Hungarian. Look up Gavor, because he tells me I have IBM in my fingertips. You tell me his name, I'll find him. Look up Gavor or Tibor Hirsch. Gavor or Tibor is Hungarian for Mike or Steve. Classic names. I hear him clicking and he says, Gavor Hirsch, 89-year-old engineer. Here's his phone number. 9 minutes to press queue. I call him up in my Heuche Deutsch, and I get his permission. I want you to know, it would be harder for me to parallel park than for me to get his permission in one phone call, which I took as an omen. Gavor Hirsch passed away last year, and I have at home, I didn't think of bringing it, a beautiful picture of Gavor holding the book in his home in Zurich. And it's an omen. And one last fun fact about this book. is that we wanted the book, and made an impact, won a few awards. And for those of you familiar, and it doesn't matter if you're not, America is divided by the Mississippi, and the United States Marines have two headquarters. From the west of the Mississippi, it's San Diego. To the east, it's Parris Island in Beaufort, South Carolina. And a colonel in the United States Marines in Parris Island, Beaufort, South Carolina, somehow got hold of this book. I've sold 450 of these books in Beaufort, South Carolina, because he will not deploy his officers to Iraq or Afghanistan till they read Heroic Children. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. We should hear good news until come. Thank you very much. I want you to just be aware that I have in the back, I have some books on the table. I think you'll find them enriching. I know I will. And the special is, if you buy 2 books, the third one is free. If you buy 4 books, 2 are free. If you buy 6 books, I pay you.